She cleaned his car out of love. What she found under that seat turned her love into the most brutal revenge. Watch how karma used a $5 tube of glue to destroy a cheater's entire world. Stick around till the end. And subscribe if you believe cheaters always pay the price.
Have you ever had one of those moments where your entire world shifts and you realize everything you thought you knew was built on lies? That moment when a single discovery pulls the thread that unravels your entire marriage? Well, let me tell you about the day I found something in my husband's car that changed everything, and how a simple tube of industrial glue became the most satisfying revenge I never saw coming. I'm Amelia, and at 40, I thought I had life figured out. I kept our house spotless, maintained a steady job, and wore a smile wide enough to convince everyone, including myself, that my marriage was perfect. You know the type of woman I was, right? The one who made excuses for her husband's bad moods and long hours, who was taught that good wives don't complain, don't question, don't rock the boat. My husband Oliver and I looked like the picture-perfect couple from the outside. Nice house, beautiful garden full of roses, neighbors who waved when we walked down the street hand in hand. We were that glossy magazine couple that everyone envies. But here's the thing about pictures. They don't tell the whole truth. They don't show how Oliver's eyes would dart away when his phone buzzed at dinner, or how he'd slide it under his thigh like a guilty schoolboy. They don't capture the way I'd lie awake, listening to him shower at strange hours, wondering if water could wash away lies as easily as dirt. The day everything changed started innocently enough. I was cleaning Oliver's car, something I did regularly because I actually cared about maintaining our things. I was crouched in the driver's seat, clearing out candy wrappers and old receipts, when my hand brushed against something under the passenger seat. A tube. Small, silver, unmistakable. Personal lubricant. In that instant, the air around me seemed to freeze. Time itself was leaning in to hear what I would do next. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even let my hands tremble. I just sat there in that car and let the silence stretch out like it might swallow me whole. Because what was normal about finding something that clearly didn't belong in the life we'd built together? The cruelest part? Nothing about our life looked broken from the outside. Our neighbors saw us as the perfect couple, but they didn't see the way Oliver came home smelling faintly of perfume I didn't own, then acted like I was too sensitive when I noticed. They didn't see how he'd started leaving crumbs of evidence around like he was daring me to find them. Late-night texts muffled under pillows, receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, traces of lipstick on glasses he'd shoved deep into the dishwasher. And every time I asked a gentle question, the kind a wife asks not because she's suspicious, but because she still hopes to be reassured, he'd brush me off with that icy half-smile, the one that said I was ridiculous for even asking. I found myself shrinking, folding smaller to avoid conflict, like a woman afraid of making noise in her own kitchen. But that day, holding that tube, something shifted deep inside me. I wasn't going to be the woman who smoothed over his lies with polite smiles anymore. I wasn't going to tell myself I was imagining things. I had seen enough. Here's what I did, and this is important. I didn't say a word. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. I placed that tube back exactly where I found it, aligning it perfectly as if it had never been touched. Then I sat there, breathing in the mix of Oliver's aftershave and that artificial car freshener he thought masked everything else. That quiet decision to do nothing in the moment felt heavier than any outburst could have been. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing not to jump. Not yet. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait, watch, and let the truth reveal itself in its own time. Over the following days, Oliver grew bolder, less careful about pretending. He'd leave evidence like breadcrumbs, as if daring me to sweep them up. And each discovery, each lie, each dismissive comment when I asked innocent questions, I cataloged away like recipes, neatly stored and categorized for later use. The neighborhood had its own way of sniffing out cracks in perfect marriages. My neighbor, Brenda, with binoculars sharper than any FBI agent, became unusually cheerful whenever she saw Oliver's car pull in late. She'd wave with that sugary grin that said she knew more than she should but enjoyed keeping it wrapped like candy. I hated caring what she thought, but I could picture her bridge group leaning in, diamond rings tapping against teacups, whispering about Amelia's perfect husband, who might not be so perfect after all. The more Oliver lied, the more invisible I felt, as if my own life was becoming a shadow play on someone else's wall. But here's the thing about pressure cookers: they only need one sharp tap before they blow. And though Oliver seemed convinced I would never tap, never challenge, never burst, he was dead wrong. I began studying his patterns like a chess master studying an opponent's moves. Oliver wasn't a creative liar. He was lazy. He recycled the same excuses until I could recite them like hymns. Every Friday night, he'd leave with the same gym bag, same hoodie, same air of rushed indifference. And every Saturday morning, he'd be out at that car, wiping down seats, rearranging the glove box, sometimes scrubbing door handles. It wasn't cleanliness he was after, it was concealment. That's when inspiration struck. What if his own lazy habits became the trap that caught him? I drove to the hardware store that Saturday afternoon, parking between two pickup trucks with my palms damp with nerves. I walked past rows of nails and paintbrushes until I reached the adhesives aisle. When a cheerful clerk asked if I needed help, I smiled, shook my head, and picked up the strongest industrial glue I could find. Who knew revenge could come packaged in a small silver tube? Back home, I set that glue on my kitchen counter like it was a relic. For a moment, I just stared at it while the dishwasher hummed behind me. The ordinary sound made the scene surreal. A suburban wife in her spotless kitchen, plotting something halfway between a prank and a revolution. With steady hands, I peeled the labels off both tubes, the innocent one from Oliver's car and the industrial adhesive I'd just bought. I swapped them carefully, smoothed them down, and prepared for the performance of a lifetime. The original tube went sealed in a container at the bottom of the trash, hidden beneath coffee grounds. The industrial glue, now wearing the disguise of personal lubricant, went back under Oliver's passenger seat, exactly where I'd found its predecessor. When I saw my reflection in the car window that night, I didn't see the tired, invisible wife I'd been for months. I saw a woman holding her own secret, a woman with a plan. For the first time in forever, I felt taller. Friday evening came like clockwork. Oliver breezed through the kitchen in his usual hoodie, gym bag slung over his shoulder, muttering his standard vague excuse about a late meeting. I wished him a good evening in the same tone. I used to ask if he wanted milk in his tea. He didn't notice the tremor of anticipation beneath my voice. I waited until his taillights disappeared, then positioned my phone camera discreetly behind the living room window, angled perfectly toward our driveway and the guest house beyond. If there's one thing I'd learned, it's that receipts are the real currency of justice. The following hours stretched like taffy, humming with anticipation. I moved around the house aimlessly, folding laundry that didn't need folding, wiping counters already clean, all while stealing glances at my phone screen. When Oliver's sedan finally turned the corner and rolled up our driveway, I almost dropped my basket of towels. Through the camera, I watched him climb out, glance around casually, and reach under the seat just as he always did. He tucked the tube into his pocket with his usual cocky confidence, utterly unaware that he was carrying his own trap. Minutes later, I watched him stride toward the guest house with that arrogant swagger, as if the world bent around his routines. But then the rhythm faltered. Through the lens, I saw him tug at the door handle, then tug harder. His body jerked in a strange half-dance. At first, I thought he was struggling with the lock, but then I caught the frantic flick of his head, the jerky movements of his arms. He pulled again, too forcefully, and his hand seemed stuck. My pulse spiked. It was happening. I walked to the window and peeked through the curtain just enough to see him directly. There was my husband, usually so smooth and composed, now wrestling like a child caught in wet cement. This man who thought he was smarter than me, cooler than me, was now bound to a doorknob like a cartoon villain undone by his own arrogance. As seconds ticked by, his panic grew louder. I saw him yank with both hands, curse under his breath, try to wipe his palms on his jeans only to realize they were also streaked with glue. For all his bluster, Oliver had never looked smaller than he did right then, flailing and twisting, completely out of control. The absurdity almost made me laugh out loud, but I held it in. This wasn't just funny, this was justice, sticky, undeniable justice. By the time he began shouting, guttural sounds of frustration that carried across the yard, the performance became impossible to ignore. Curtains shifted in neighboring houses, heads appeared over fences. The theater was about to get an audience. I carried my mug of tea to the porch, pretending to enjoy the evening air, letting my eyes land on Oliver only after Brenda's unmistakable voice called out, asking if everything was all right. Oliver jerked his head up, face red and wild, hands still tugging hopelessly against the glued handle. Brenda stepped onto her porch like a queen surveying scandal, binoculars swinging from her neck like a medal of nosiness. Within minutes, the Hendersons strolled over with their yapping terrier, and old Mr. Wilkins appeared, leaning on his cane, eyes sparkling like a boy at a circus. I stood on my porch, pretending surprise, tilting my head in innocent confusion, while my insides hummed with nerves and exhilaration. After years of being invisible, suddenly all eyes were on Oliver, and I didn't need to lift a finger. The sight of my husband stuck to a door would have been comical enough, but the way he scrambled to maintain dignity made it even better. He tried laughing it off, mumbling about a DIY mishap, as though any sane person would believe he was renovating in a hoodie with his hands covered in what looked like caramel. Brenda called out suggestions, each more unhelpful than the last, asking if he'd tried turning it gently or if maybe the handle just needed oil. The Hendersons whispered behind their hands while their dog barked furiously at Oliver, as if it too smelled hypocrisy. Wilkins shook his head with mock sympathy, muttering that some folks just weren't cut out for home projects. The crowd thickened in that slow but inevitable way people gather when they sense entertainment, disguised as disaster. A teenager began filming on his phone, pretending to check the weather. Ramirez appeared in her apron, wiping flour-covered hands. Two joggers slowed their pace, earbuds dangling, captivated by the sight of my husband twisting like a fish in invisible netting. Oliver's pride wouldn't let him admit he was stuck. He tugged his sweatshirt sleeve down to shield his glued hand, barked at the teenager to put his phone away, snapped at Brenda to stop gawking. But the more he lashed out, the more the neighbors' eyes narrowed. They weren't just seeing a man with a silly accident. They were seeing someone unravel, lose composure, lose control. I leaned against the porch railing, calm as Sunday morning, and let him dig his own grave one graceless gesture at a time. Sometimes revenge doesn't roar. Sometimes it purrs softly while your enemy claws at his own trap. When Brenda announced she was calling emergency services, Oliver's voice cracked between embarrassment and fury, but his protests only fueled concern. After all, when a grown man is physically tethered to a door and starting to sweat through his clothes, people assume it's serious. By the time sirens wailed in the distance, the scene had the energy of a small-town parade. The ambulance pulled up like a guest of honor, flashing red lights painting everything in garish streaks. Two young EMTs stepped out, their expressions hovering between concern and the kind of disbelief people wear when they know a story will follow them home to dinner. Brenda rushed forward to explain in dramatic detail how poor Oliver had been trapped, her words dripping with relish. Oliver sputtered about DIY gone wrong, but his voice cracked under so many watching eyes. The EMTs began their routine questions, but each one peeled back another layer of his facade. What substance had he used? Why was there adhesive on the guest house door? Was anyone else inside who might need help? Each question landed like a hammer. I watched Oliver flinch, fumbling for answers he didn't have. The EMTs noticed the perfume clinging to the doorway, the second toothbrush in the sink, the half-empty lotion bottle on the shelf. None of it belonged to me. None could be explained as coincidence. Brenda gasped loud enough to echo when she spotted the lotion. The Hendersons exchanged knowing looks. Even the teenager filming lowered his phone, eyebrows raised in dawning comprehension. Oliver, once so careful about separating his lives, had been undone by a door he couldn't let go of. He stammered, tried to laugh it off, but the more he squirmed, the more obvious the cracks became. I stood quietly at the edge of it all, hands folded around my empty teacup, a picture of calm composure. I didn't need to shout or accuse. The scene spoke louder than I ever could. When the EMTs finally freed him with solvent, gently prying at his sticky fingers, the damage was already done. He wasn't just a man caught in glue. He was a man caught in his own lies, exposed before the very community he'd worked so hard to impress. But I wasn't finished. I walked slowly toward the guest house, my steps deliberate, each one echoing louder in Oliver's ears than the sirens. He turned toward me with panic flickering, a silent plea to let it drop, to pretend this circus was just an accident. For years, I'd granted him that mercy, overlooking late nights, ignoring receipts, swallowing questions I had every right to ask. But mercy is a currency, and mine had run out. I opened the guest house door wide, ignoring his hissed protest, and stepped far enough inside for neighbors to glimpse what I'd already known. The blonde hair in the brush, the perfume bottle tipped on the counter, the cheap floral scent hanging in the air. Evidence doesn't need to scream to be damning. "Oliver," Brenda said, shaking her head, "what on earth have you been doing in there?" The question landed like a stone in a pond, ripples spreading across the crowd. Oliver opened his mouth, but no answer came. He looked at me, expecting rescue, expecting me to plaster over his shame like I had so many times before. But I kept my eyes steady, lips curved in a polite, almost amused smile. The toothbrush, the perfume, the neighbors' knowing glances. They did the work for me. Then I slipped back inside and returned with my phone, the recording from earlier glowing on its screen. The image wasn't flashy, but it clearly showed Oliver retrieving the tube from his car and heading straight for the guest house. I held it out calmly for anyone who cared to look. The silence that followed was richer than any speech. Brenda leaned closer, lips pressing into a thin line of satisfaction. The Hendersons gasped softly. Wilkins nodded with solemn confirmation of gossip he'd suspected for years. Oliver paled, jaw working furiously, but no sound came. For once in our marriage, he was speechless. The video didn't scream or accuse, it simply showed what was. And that simplicity was devastating. No matter how many times he'd called me paranoid, here was proof, undeniable and plain. Relief washed over me. Not the kind that makes you weep, but the kind that straightens your shoulders and lets you breathe deeper than you thought possible. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I had been right all along. In the weeks that followed, Oliver packed his bags and moved to a rental across town, slipping away quietly like a shadow, finally admitting it couldn't exist without the light it had tried so hard to block. The neighbors noticed, but this time the whispers weren't of pity for me. They were nods of respect, recognition of an unspoken truth. I had stood my ground without screaming, without losing myself. Justice hadn't crashed down in a courtroom. It had unfolded in a driveway, in front of roses and mailboxes, and wide-eyed neighbors who would never look at Oliver the same way again. With him gone, the house felt lighter. The air didn't carry the weight of lies anymore. I found myself laughing at small things, like how Brenda still pretended not to spy, accidentally aiming her binoculars my way, only to wave sheepishly when caught. I even painted the guest house door fresh white. Not to erase what happened, but to claim it as mine again. Sometimes when I pass by, I glance at the handle and smile, remembering the ridiculous sight of Oliver trapped, undone not by me shouting, but by me waiting. The change inside me was profound. I walked taller, spoke steadier, carried myself with calm I hadn't known in years. Friends said I sounded lighter, freer, as though they could hear chains breaking through the phone. I had stopped being the woman who smoothed over lies with polite smiles. I'd become the woman who could set a plan in motion, stand back, and let truth expose itself. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. Never mistake a gentle heart for a blind eye. Life has a way of evening scales, of sticking liars to their own mess. Sometimes revenge doesn't come in grand gestures or fiery speeches. Sometimes it comes in the form of a quiet woman, a silver tube, and a doorknob that refuses to let go. Today, I live freer, stronger, truer to myself than I thought possible. The roses bloom, mornings are mine, and my laughter rings out without fear. When I sit on my porch sipping tea as the sun sets, I feel the balance restored. Because in the end, karma doesn't need help. It just needs a little patience. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply watching someone get stuck in their own lies, literally